by McDowell which would conduct the flanking maneuver. Originally scheduled to sweep into the Confederate left at 7 a.m., the flanking movement was delayed by 2 hours. Tyler's attack at the Stone Bridge started on time at 5:15 a.m., but it was a poor imitation of an assault. Colonel Nathan Evans, the Confederate brigade commander at the Stone Bridge, had only a few troops at his side and could easily have been swept away by Tyler's division. However, Tyler only proceeded with a slow cannonading over the course of 4 hours. Evans suspected a ruse. He could see the dust rising above the trees to the west and received a message from the signal tower at the rear that the main body of Union troops was crossing Bull Run at Sudley Springs Ford. The colonel realized that the Union's main attack would try to roll up the left end of the Confederate line. Evans left a small contingent to deceive Tyler and took the remainder of his brigade of South Carolina and Louisiana troops as swiftly as possible to his left and rear toward the Union assault. Arriving on Matthews Hill, Evans and approximately 1,000 of his men confronted a total of 18,000 Union troops. Evans quickly placed his men in defensive positions under cover of the woods overlooking the road the Union soldiers would have to take from Sudley Springs Ford.
Well, it was a decisive victory, that is to say, a very much a victory for the Confederate forces, but surprisingly it was touch and go for much of it. Both sides were reasonably equally well matched. And each side had initially planned to turn the flank of the other side, and for quite some time they slugged it out on the 21st of July, 1861, with one side temporarily yielding, the other temporarily gaining. But in the meantime, General Joseph E. Johnston's forces from the Winchester area were moving toward the Confederate Army to reinforce it, and it was Johnston's forces with Kirby Smith that in the end proved decisive for that battle. They came in on the Confederate left flank and demoralized the Federals. The Federals withdrew. In particular, in the course of their retreat, several Confederate artillery shells landed in places that created a panic, and Bull Run Russell, as he came to be known, the correspondent of the London Times, happened to be present to record this and wrote a vivid account of the Union panic and their flight back into Washington that was widely distributed, and for a time blackened Russell's reputation in the North because he gave such a lively account of things. The Union Army streamed back into Washington. The Congress people and civilians who came out to watch what they thought was going to be the major defeat of the Confederates, in fact, fled back, adding to the confusion. So it was a memorable disaster for the United States. Initially, there was a great deal of demoralization, but I think it steeled the resolve of the North, and in fact, when the realization of what had happened percolated through the northern towns and counties, people became irate and I think much more inclined to enlist and much more inclined to see that the Confederacy did not continue to exist. And I think in the end it proved a Pyrrhic victory for the Confederates. I think it made them overconfident, made them think that there was in fact some truth to the boast they had that one Southerner could whip 5 Northerners and other such things. So I think it gave the Confederates an unjustified sense of superiority and was their undoing in the long run.
First Manassas was a desperately fierce, bloody battle which put to rest the Union's belief in a quick, decisive victory. It proved the undoing of some officers who performed poorly. General McDowell was removed from his command and replaced by Major General George B. McClellan, who would soon raise Union morale and create the new 150,000-strong Army of the Potomac.
Irvin McDowell, who had the misfortune to be the Union commander, and I think he did a reasonably competent job on the field, but the tide of fate was against him, and he was the victim of a most unfortunate situation.
Others at the Battle of First Manassas proved their mettle and military genius. General Thomas Stonewall Jackson was one of these. Along with Robert E. Lee, General Stonewall Jackson was one of the most outstanding strategists in the Confederate Army. No other general helped to win more decisive victories than he did. He was appointed to West Point in 1842. After a brief tour of duty in the cavalry, he was assigned to the staff of the Virginia Military Institute in Lexington, Virginia. Jackson remained at VMI until Virginia's secession from the Union in 1861. He was given command of the 1st Brigade of the Virginia Volunteers, later known as the famous Stonewall Brigade. After achieving a major victory at Bull Run, Jackson and his men were ordered to Richmond to assist General Robert E. Lee in driving the Federal troops from the outskirts of the Confederate capital. Stonewall's cavalry and his soldiers were one of the best fighting units of their era. They trained long and hard. Jackson, though beloved, was not an easy man to serve under. He expected and demanded much of his men. While leading his troops in the early battles of the Civil War, Jackson earned his nickname. In combat, Jackson had his troops remain in place like a stone wall, while other Southern units were falling behind.
Pierre Gustave Toutant Beauregard, the Confederate officer, was also a major Confederate commander there, and this was the occasion when Thomas Jonathan Stonewall Jackson received his nickname of Stonewall. There's some controversy about exactly what was said and what was going on at the time. One of the Confederate commanders in falling back is supposed to have said, "Look, there stands Jackson like a stone wall, rally behind the Virginians," but there's another theory that indicates that in fact he was quite angry with Jackson for not moving forward to help him, and that he was irately claiming that Jackson stood there like a stone wall instead of moving forward and coming to his rescue. But the consensus usually is that he would be called Stonewall because he was doing something right, that he was withstanding the Union forces, and ever after he became known as Stonewall.
The Battle of First Manassas, at which Stonewall Jackson made his name, was bloody and difficult for all the men involved. An often forgotten fact is that it was just as bloody and difficult for the women involved. The role of women in the Civil War has never before been examined in detail, but it was extensive and important.